All right, let's get into it. If you're building apps for iOS, you already know that auto layout is an absolute powerhouse. But let's be honest, when it breaks, it can be a massive headache. So today, we're going to crack the code on debugging and turn all that frustration into total confidence. Yes. I'm willing to bet every single one of us has seen this error message staring back from the Xcode console. It's pretty much the classic sign that your layout is in deep trouble. Of course it does. It's like a rite of passage for iOS developers. But don't you worry, because today we are going to demystify this and all the other common layout issues so you can solve them like every single time. So, we're going to reframe this whole problem. This isn't just about fixing annoying errors. It's about solving a puzzle. It's time to put on our detective hats. This is the new mindset. Your user interface, the one that's all messed up, that's the crime scene. And every single warning, every log message from Xcode, well, those are the clues pointing you right to the solution. Your job is just to follow the evidence. You know, every good detective knows the recurring offenders, the ones that show up again and again. In the world of auto layout, there are 5 usual suspects that are behind most of the trouble. So let's go down the lineup and unmask them one by one. Okay, our number 1 suspect is the most straightforward. This happens when you've given the system 2 or more commands that are just impossible to follow at the same time. Think of it like telling a box to be exactly 100 pixels wide and 200 pixels wide at the same time. You can't do both. You've basically created a paradox for the layout engine, and it has to break one of your rules to escape. And this just lays it all out so clearly, right? On the left, you've got the problem. The constraints are fighting. And on the right, you see that classic example. You've hard-coded a width of 200, but then you've pinned it inside a space that demands it be 300 wide. The result? You guessed it, that infamous error log. Now, suspect number 2 is the complete opposite problem. It's not about giving too much information, it's about giving too little. The layout becomes ambiguous because you haven't given it enough rules to know exactly where to put something or how big to make it. It's just left guessing what you actually want. And you can see exactly what happens here. The system has no clue where to place the view. A perfect example is a label that has its width set, but you've given it 0 vertical constraints. I mean, should it be at the top, the bottom, dead center? Without that info, auto layout just takes a shot in the dark and it lets you know it's guessing with those little yellow warnings. Oh, this one can be super confusing. You spend all this time arranging things perfectly in your storyboard, it looks beautiful, but then you run the app, and everything just jumps around. This happens when what you see in Interface Builder gets out of sync with the actual constraints you've set. And wow, does this hit home or what? On the left, that's your perfectly designed screen in the editor. But on the right, that's the frustrating reality when you run the app. The button isn't where you put it, because the constraints, which are the real source of truth, are telling it to go somewhere else entirely. All right, let's look at a more subtle suspect. This one is all about competition. Picture 2 labels side by side, but there's not enough room for both of them. Which one should shrink to make space? Well, that's decided by its compression resistance priority. The higher that priority, the more it fights to avoid getting squished. If you don't set these priorities, auto layout has to guess, and its guess might not be what you had in mind. So our final suspect involves a fight against a view's own natural instincts. A label, for example, wants to be big enough to show all of its text. That's its intrinsic content size. If you come along and give it a fixed width constraint that's too small, you're creating a conflict between your rule and the view's own desire. This is often where those compression priorities we just talked about become so important. You're basically telling the system how to resolve the fight. Okay, we have met the suspects. Now it's time to open our detective's toolkit. These are the awesome instruments Xcode gives us to investigate the crime scene and bring these layout criminals to justice. So here it is, your 5-step investigative playbook. Think of this as your standard procedure for every case. We always start with the most obvious clue, the console logs. That's where Xcode is literally telling you what's wrong. If that's not enough, we escalate to more powerful visual tools, like the debug view hierarchy. From there, we verify the details. And finally, we resolve everything back in Interface Builder. Mastering this flow is what separates the pros from the people pulling their hair out. And I have to call special attention to the debug view hierarchy. This tool is your secret weapon, for real. It literally explodes your entire UI into a 3D space, letting you see exactly how views are layered, where they're overlapping, and why things might not be showing up where you expect them to. It is an absolute game changer for complex layouts. Okay, now for the fun part. Let's connect the dots. A great detective knows which tool to use for which clue. So let's run through a couple of common scenarios and pinpoint the exact tool you need to solve them fast. So here's the scene. You're in your storyboard and you see those little yellow warning indicators pop up. The system is basically waving a flag and telling you, hey, I'm missing some information here. So what do? The answer is simple. You give it the information it's asking for. You can use Xcode's Add Missing Constraints feature or just manually add the position or size constraints yourself. Either way, you're removing that ambiguity and poof, the warnings disappear. Case closed. And here's our other classic clue. Everything looks absolutely pixel perfect in the editor, but the second you hit run, a button or a label just yeets itself to a totally different spot on the screen. The fix for this one often feels like a magic trick. It's usually just one click away. You use the Update Frames command in Interface Builder. This tells the visual editor, hey, redraw this view based on its actual constraints. And it immediately snaps to its true position, closing the case of the misplaced view. We've gone through the usual suspects and we've opened up our toolkit. So what's the big idea here? What's the one thing you need to remember that pulls all of this together? You know, when you really get down to it, almost every single auto layout problem you will ever face boils down to one of these three things. It's either a conflict because you have too many constraints fighting each other, it's ambiguity because you have too few, or it's a competition between views that you haven't solved with the right priorities. Every single one of our suspects falls into one of these categories. That's it. That's the secret. By understanding these core causes, you're not just fixing bugs anymore. You're a true layout detective. You have the clues, you have the tools, and you have the logic to solve any case that comes your way. So the only question left is, what amazing, perfectly laid out app are you going to build next?